Hello and welcome to this League of Women Voters program, Who Are Canvassers and What Do They Do?, which focuses on the board of canvassers and the role of this board in the election process. Our presenters are Sandy Call, a member of the Grand Traverse County Board of Canvassers, and Sam Goldman, Chief Deputy County Clerk of Grand Traverse County. Sandy is a lifelong Republican and has served on the Grand Traverse County Party Executive Committee for over 25 years. She's held the office of Vice Chair, Secretary, and Treasurer, and has also chaired a variety of committees and events. She has experience as a campaign manager for many candidates, has knocked on hundreds of doors, and made thousands of phone calls. She currently serves on the State Committee of the Republican Party. Our next speaker is going to be Sam Goldman, who has a diverse educational and professional background and holds multiple graduate degrees, including a Master of Public Administration and a PhD in political science. He has served in local government, in grant management, and in academic affairs, and has administered elections in the states of Michigan, Mississippi, North Carolina, and Tennessee. During our most recent election, he supported the canvassers for Grand Traverse County. Both of our speakers will share their knowledge, experiences, and some of the challenges that have and continue to impact their work supporting the election process. And now, before we get started, Sandy would like to say a few words of appreciation.
I just wanted to let you know this program was started by Steve Horn. He thought that the community should know more about what the Board of Canvassers does. And so he started talking with Cheryl to present this program. In the meantime, actually, the first day that we started to canvass, Steve got ill and had to go to the hospital. So he is unable to come and be with us. But Sam has graciously accepted to fill in for him. Says he doesn't want us to think that he knows as much as Steve, although I think he does. Anyway, ladies, I talked to several ladies, and they were really excited about Sam, who spoke a couple months ago, and wished that he would come back again. So, you've got your wish, and you owe me one. Okay, Sam.
Well, that is quite a build-up, so I'll try to live up to that. Good afternoon. Very happy to be able to come and speak and talk about the important work that our Board of Canvassers does, in not just Grand Traverse County, but in Michigan generally. We're very fortunate to have a decentralized system here in Michigan that allows a lot of local control and local accountability, so that we have folks from the community, both Democrat and Republican, who come in and do this really hard but necessary work, canvassing and looking after the election, trying to make sure that everything was done properly, that all votes are counted, that every proper vote is accounted for. So we're very fortunate to have a good group here in Grand Traverse County. And I think, generally speaking, Michigan does it the right way. There's no wrong way to do it, per se. All 50 states have some level of post-election reconciliation activities. Sometimes it goes to an elected board. Sometimes there's administrative professionals who'll do it and then turn it over to a public body for inspection. But in the case of Michigan, we're one of 33 states that has a local board of canvassers that report to a state board of canvassers. So it works out very well in that regard. We've been doing it this way for a number of years. I believe it goes back to Public Act 128.24C from the statute. And that's began about 1963, where we've had an appointed 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans presented to the board of, their credentials were presented to the Board of Commissioners at their organizational meeting every 4 years, and they get appointed to this position. And they'll come in beginning the day after the election and review all the materials that were submitted, the vote tallies, various different paperwork that comes in, and I think Sandy will probably go into greater detail on that, but they come in and give it a very thorough once-over, and then they look over it again several more times very thoroughly and make sure that everything was done properly and all the votes are properly tabulated. So it's a very interesting system we have here in Michigan, in that it kind of builds on that Madisonian idea of everybody watching everybody else, right? So we have Democrats watching Republicans, we have we have a board of canvassers that watches over the precinct officials who are also Democrats and Republicans. We have a county clerk who's elected and accountable to the voters who's supposed to make this process work. We have an appointment process that goes through our elected commissioners. So there's a great deal of mutual oversight and checks and balances built into this process. And it can be a very complex process, and it can also be a very simple one too in many regards. So, I guess the really key thing to remember in all of this is there's a lot of work done behind the scenes that most people don't see that's very, very boring but very necessary, because everything that we've done in the last 100+ years to make voting more easy, more accessible to the public also creates levels of administrative complexity that people don't see and don't realize. So if you create, no excuse absentee and you have this high volume of absentee votes coming in, there's people in every local clerk's office that are tasked with administering and dealing with this, voluminous increase in paperwork. If you, have multiple ways to vote over multiple days, the county canvassers have to come in and make sense of that and look at these different precincts, both absentee voting precincts and election day precincts, and make sense of all the different paperwork that's required as an oversight to be filled out and signed and used by all these various different low-level groups that go through and assist in this process. So they've done a great job handling these various nuances that have been added to the voting process over time. So we've been, since 1963, had a board of canvassers in Grand Traverse County, and I think it's very rare that we've had 2 elections that looked alike. So these folks are constantly coming in, updating their skill set, staying abreast of the law, just staying flexible, being good-natured, good-humored, and kind of work together to make this process work for the people in Grand Traverse County and, of course, statewide as well. These are all, by and large, very dedicated people, and if there is any partisanship and those types of things, they quickly get left at the door just because of the volume of actual work that needs to be done. Which is one of the great things to see, is these folks working together. You've got people appointed by the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and you watch these bitter campaigns play out in the public. We see these attack ads, and we see angry people, and we hear all these various things about polarization. And then after the election's over, and you get a big cup of coffee, and you go in the next day, and here come your Democrats and your Republicans, and they greet each other, and they get down to work, and it's just kind of a refreshing sight to see. Not many people get to actually see that side of it. And it can be very encouraging, especially after you go through these bruising campaigns, which can sometimes be very discouraging, if you're watching those things. So I feel very fortunate to be able to work alongside these people in some very important work. And I'll let Sandy talk more about what they do, and I'll be happy to come back later and answer any questions that you guys have.
Well, I am going to concentrate on Grand Traverse County because that's where my knowledge is. For your information, most people know this, but there are 4 people on the Board of Canvassers, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. They are nominated by the county chair, sends in 3 names to the county clerk, who then in turn takes them to the Board of Commissioners, the county commissioners, which vote on who should be on this board. Now, it's usually staggered so that you have 1 Democrat coming in and 1 Republican coming in, and you still have another Democrat and a Republican that's been there before. This is my 3rd term. You can run again if you wish, and so you put your name back on the list to run again if you wish to do that. The 4 people that we had this time around was Steve Horn, who I told you, and he is the chair We nominated him as chair, and I am the secretary vice chair. And then we had Lori Andrzejewski, I think, and I apologize, Lori, if I mispronounced your name, but we just call her Lori A. And she's the other Republican, and Tom Wirtz, Dr. Tom Wirtz, is the other Democrat. So that's our 4 people. We're very, I have to say, this is very good. We work well together. We joke sometimes, as if any of you ladies have been there to watch. We do joke sometimes, but we're very serious, and we spend a lot of time working hard. So not a lot of jokes, okay, but something comes up, and we think it's funny, you know, it will come up, but we continue to keep our minds on things. We have 39 precincts and 16 AV logbooks to check, and we have a sheet, 2-sided, which gives us a checklist of everything that we have to check on each logbook. And the logbook usually comes in a 3-ring binder and has a sheet for everything that we're checking. And they swear in the chair at the precinct level. They swear in the chair, and she has to sign her name, and they swear in the workers, and they have to sign their name and be sworn in. That's one of the checklists that we have, and make sure that they do. And when the tape comes out of the machine, all of the people who are there at the end must sign their name also, that they witnessed it. They have when they put everything in a container and seal it, 1 Democrat, 1 Republican has to sign that, and all of the people who were there when they closed it up have to sign that. There's any number of other things, which one of them is there is a list of all of the voters, and it gives not their addresses or anything like that, but their names and the ballot number that they used. Now, on some of them, it might say spoiled. If they spoiled their ballot, made a mistake on it or something, they can turn it back in, request a new one, and so there might be on this list. When we get them, if there is a difference in the list and the amount of ballots that are cast, there must be a remarks page. Sometimes the remarks page are really a book, and they're fun to read, and sometimes they're, whoa, what is this telling me? But we have to analyze and make sure that if there is a difference, they must tell us why they had a difference in the amount of the list of voters and the list of ballots. And to be quite frank, we had 3 this year. As Steve not being there, I had to be the chair. I had to sign a form that went to the state saying where the differences were. There were 3 precincts who had a difference. All 3 of them was 1 vote off, and the reason was because somebody came in, and this is one of the stories in your remarks. Somebody came in, one lady voted 3 times, spoiled her ballot 3 times, was exhausted, didn't want to do it, and walked out without voting at all. So there was an extra voter's name because she'd already registered with no ballot. So that was where the difference was. That's usually what we find. That's the things that are usually wrong with them. The only other thing that we have had at sometimes is, like I said, they had to both sign a paper, and somebody forgot to sign. So we have to call them the day we're there, and they have to come in and sign their name. Yes, I did witness this, but I forgot to put my name on it. Those are the kinds of things that we find wrong. We don't have a lot of the ones that they might have down in the southeast corner of the state. Ours is pretty well done. I find that it's getting easier. Like I said, this is my 3rd time, and it is getting easier. And I think it's because Bonnie is having training sessions for the precinct clerks. And so the clerks are understanding what's important and why they need to do it the way it says to do it, and what's it's important to keep it safe, and everything is doing fine. And I think that is probably why our job is getting easier. And I think most of the clerks have been there for a while, so as it gets easier for them too, so they understand more. So our job is very serious. It is difficult. Like I said, there's a page with 2 sides to it of all the questions that we have to ask. What happened here? What happened there? And then have a remarks that tells us, and they have to sign when they close the containers, have to be signed. All of that is very thorough, and we need to check it all. And like I said, we had 3 this year that I had to report to the state. They were all 3 very simple to, well documented in the remarks page of what happened to them, and they're mostly, somebody voided theirs and then decided they didn't want to vote or what, so they left without voting, and that's what these 3 were. I'm thinking we had to sign every one, every time, every logbook had to be checked, and we had that checklist, and we, at the end, especially where there's a ballot where they're to say how many voted or who voted for what or whatever. Write-ins, we are very, we have to check all write-ins. And so those kinds of things, our board signs our name at the bottom to say, yes, we checked it very thoroughly, and it is above board, and nothing wrong with it. I think that I do want to say thank you to Sam and Bonnie. The Board of Canvassers couldn't get along without them. We have questions for them all the time. Bonnie has forms printed up for us ahead of time. Sam has all these spreadsheets that makes it all easier for us to figure out why and where and what we're doing. So I do want to thank them. They are very helpful and makes our job easier too. This time around, they give us 2 weeks. We had until the 22nd to get it done. This time around, like I said, we started on Thursday after the election, and we had to shut down at noon because Steve went to the hospital, and we didn't have enough for a quorum. And then Friday, of course, was Veterans Day, and we don't work on Veterans Day. So then we didn't come back in again until Monday, but we finished up on Tuesday. So that just goes to show you we were very diligent, we worked very hard, and we got it all done in that length of time. I think that's all I have to say, and if you want to ask questions, Sam and I would both be willing to answer any questions. Ann will take that.
Yes, this is the question time. Thank you so much, Sam and Sandy, for our introduction to canvassing at the Grand Traverse County level. And if you have questions in the audience, there should be a card and something to write on, and you can submit those to a league member will come around and pick those up. I'm not sure who's doing that right now. And then we will ask questions for of our panelists. And my questions that have already been submitted, some of them might be addressed to one of you first, but if the other one has a perspective or wants to chime in, that's fine. So I will just, they're kind of jumbled, and we'll just take it from there, okay? So first question is about Michigan elections being known for strong local control, as I think Sam said. Do canvassers follow the same procedures in every county, or are there variations from one county to another in terms of those lists or procedures that are followed?
Sure. I think it's kind of...
And are you live with your mic?
I think so. Can you hear me okay?
Okay.
Okay. So, yes, I think there's a large deal of uniformity that's required by the State Bureau of Elections. They provide some guidelines and how a canvas should be conducted, what forms need to be completed at the completion of the canvas. But the conduct of the canvas itself is sometimes largely governed by the individual board of canvassers themselves, you know, who is the chair, how they want to approach the reconciliation process, what they are focusing in on. Not every precinct and every jurisdiction in Michigan uses the same voting system. So, for example, we use ES&S, Electronic Systems and Software, here in Michigan. We're one of 7 counties here in Grand Traverse County, excuse me, who use this. Some use Dominion Voting Services, some use HART. They're going to generate different reports. They might look a little different. They might, you know, not go, we go by, and Sandy, you'd probably be better to speak to this, but they like to look at it precinct by precinct instead of race by race. But they're all required to have the same basic documents filled out at the end. How they get there is sometimes a stylistic choice or, you know, based on necessity. But it should look fairly uniform throughout the state if everybody's doing it correctly.
Any comment on that, Sandy?
I think he covered it.
Okay, great. And now, one question was related to what happened to Steve Horn. What does happen when a canvasser isn't available, maybe ahead of time, not an emergency situation, but are there backups already appointed, or how does that work?
Actually, as in Steve's situation, he knew he was going to have to, not going to be able to be there that next week. So Bonnie had already contacted someone who had worked. Elizabeth Whalen had been on the board for 13 years prior to that. And so Bonnie went to her and said, can you fill in for Steve? And of course she had to be sworn in again, and she covered for the whole week of Steve. We had 2 days when Lori was on vacation, and she was not there. And so we had a temporary come and fill in for one of those days. The first day was the day that Steve got ill, and we didn't have enough people there anyway, so we only worked that first half day. And once he went to the hospital, then we didn't have any. So then we had another Republican come and fill in a temporary on Monday, and she worked that one day, and then Lori was back. And of course, we thought we were going to be there much longer, and so Lori came back, and we thought we were going to have to work all week, but we got it done before that. So Lori was only there for one day, but whomever is there has to sign the paperwork at the end that they witnessed it and that it was done.
And if I could just add too that the party chairs are involved too in that process. Right. So there's usually Bonnie will first go to will be the names that were previously submitted or people who had worked on the board before, and the party chairs have some authority there to say they'd rather have somebody else or a different name, but usually they work pretty close together. It's a ministerial job, so they want people who can go in there who know the procedure and don't have to start from scratch.
Thank you. What motivated you, Sandy, to run for the Board of Canvassers?
Well, the first time I ran, I'm getting feedback. The first time I ran, I filled in for my very good friend. Linda Witt had been on the board for quite a while, and she got ill at the last minute, and they needed someone to fill in for her, and so I said, I will do that. So then, of course, Bonnie had to take that. I had to go to my county chair. Then she had to take it to, or he had to take it to, Bonnie took it to the commissioners. They voted, said, yes, that's fine. And so I did, and it was supposed to be temporary because we thought Linda could come back. And as it turned out, Linda never was able to come back on it. And so I filled in from that point forward, and I continued to run after that.
Thank you. And this would be for both of you to respond, but do you think the canvassing process could, in Grand Traverse County, could be streamlined or improved? And if so, how?
I won't say can't be streamlined. I think anything and everything can always be improved, but I think Grand Traverse County is very well done, and I don't see very many problems with it.
Yeah, I think I would just say, it's an important distinction. A canvas is not like a recount. It is sort of a thorough examination of all of the paperwork and everything associated with the election. So streamlining is a tough term for that, because you want to be thorough. You want to look at everything as best you can and make sure you have good, ethical people of good faith doing it. And in that, we couldn't be better. We have no choice but to always look at process and look at different things, because the election process is going to change. The passage of Proposal 2, we have more early voting. We don't know what that's going to constitute at the state level, what additional forms that might include, what that will look like in practice. So if we're going to have administrative precincts or centralized voting stations or voting centers, as opposed to election day precincts that are open for 9 days. So things will look different going forward. We'll have different forms, we'll have different spreadsheets, and those type of things. That's unavoidable. But yeah, we'll always stay up on the best practices and try to make sure that we provide the best resources for the canvassers.
Thank you. Who now is, both of you, I think, have touched on this, but people are asking for a little bit more information about who trains the canvassers and describe what the training entails.
So I guess the State Bureau of Elections, which is a sort of a division of the Secretary of State's office, provides guidance, general guidance for how a canvass should be conducted. And that is very insufficient to just hand that over to the canvassers and say, here you go. So what we've done in the past is Bonnie Shealy, the county clerk, will spend time at the beginning of every canvass going through processes and procedures that worked effectively in the past. And usually we have a good deal of institutional knowledge where we don't have to reinvent the wheel. They kind of come in and know their jobs and what works well and what doesn't work so well. But kind of trying to understand any new forms we might have or any new presentations of those forms. We're always reconfiguring something, or the state forms look different, and trying to make sure that everybody understands where the information is that they need. So it's sort of an introductory training from the county clerk, and then I would say, and this is maybe a understatement, or I don't know, but it's sort of an ongoing organic process, everybody training each other as it goes to try to make sure that the process is working smoothly and that everybody has what they need.
And I would say, I mentioned before, we always have somebody on there that's been there before. And so when you get a new Republican, you have the old Republican, that's me. I'm the old Republican on there, who's there to help with the new one. And the same way with Steve was the Democrat that was here when Tom Wertz came in. So we help them, we explain it to them, we work with them right up front until they're comfortable with what they're doing. And Bonnie gives us a book. It's a 3-ring binder, and it's about this thick, of all the rules and regulations and what needs to be done and how it's done and all that. And you're supposed to read that ahead of time. It takes you a little while to cover it, but there is a book that tells you what the instructions are.
A question. Once a canvasser is selected by a political party, does the party have any role in guiding or instructing? And second part of the question is, does the canvasser report back to the party at any point?
No. The party has nothing. Once you're on the board, you are on the board, and you have nothing. The party itself has nothing to do with you. If they're interested, you can go back and tell them what's happening and that sort of thing, but you never have anybody on the party telling you how to do it or how to go about it. The other thing I wanted to make clear, and I don't know that I did that, is we have 2 Republicans and we have 2 Democrats, and we always get along. We have fun together. We like each other. We don't discuss politics, and so consequently, we don't have a problem with each other, and we enjoy each other's company, and we joke with each other and that sort of thing. So it is not something where you're sitting there across the table with, well, I'm not going to speak to him because he's not on my party. So I want to make it clear that we do get along well together.
Can I break protocol and ask Sandy a question as a follow-up? Because I've always wondered this.
I'm not going to make you write it down, Sam. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, just because you got me thinking, I just wonder, has the rank and file, have you talked to people who actually cared about this process before 2020 in the parties? And this always seemed like it was kind of a tough detail before, right? It didn't. Yeah.
Mostly nobody ever asks me. They know I'm on the Board of Canvassers, but nobody from the party ever comes and says, "Oh, well, how'd that go?" or "What did you do?" or whatever. The League of Women Voters come in and observe while we're there. And we've always had somebody from that group come in and watch to see what's going on. But other than that, we don't. No, I take that back. Not this 2020. There were some people who came in from, I think it was the Democratic Party, but I'm not sure, that came in and observed. But I don't think anybody from the Republican Party ever asked me anything about it.
Canvass has only recently become famous, I think.
Right. Sandy, you mentioned when you were presenting about an AV logbook. I'm guessing that's not audio-visual. Could you tell us what AV means?
Absentee voters. And some of the smaller precincts have their absentee votes in the same logbook as the present day. But the bigger ones, Long Lake, East Bay, Garfield, where they have 4 or 5 different precincts, they have their AV separate. And they have a separate AV board that does the work in their precincts. Sometimes it's one for the 5 precincts, and sometimes they each have their own AV logbook. So that's why we have 39 precincts, but we have only 16 AVs, is because not every precinct has an AV logbook. They do it right in with their other book.
Does that make it more complex for you at your end?
I would say it's probably easier, although the AV books are the hardest ones to do, but I would say it's easier for them to be separated.
Why is it harder to do an AV book versus a non-AV? Because it changes every year?
Yeah. And that's where you'll find more discrepancies or problems. Somebody received an absentee ballot through the mail, didn't want to vote that way, brings it back in. The clerk at the present day has to destroy that absentee ballot, and if they're going to vote on present day, and so they get another ballot for that. So it's a little bit complicated, but you have to be sure that you get the old ballot before you can give them a new ballot.
Why can't they just fill out that ballot?
Excuse me, we need this on the recording so that everyone can hear this. If you want to put it on paper. Thank you. Signatures play an important role in the voting process. Do you have any concerns that cursive is no longer being taught in schools and the implications for signatures? Any alternatives?
That is one of the problems that we have. We can't read the signatures. But, however, some of the clerks have realized that, and they have started putting a typewritten card in their book with the names of the people who are signing, so that we can say, oh, yes, that's what that name says. And so we have their printed name on a card, which we can match up with the signatures. But the it's important that we match up the signatures that started, that are on the tape, that are in the book. And that's why it's important to know whose signature they are. But it does help because some of the precinct clerks are doing that. They are typing it on a card and putting it in their book so we can understand the signatures. But yeah, some of them are out of this world. You wouldn't believe.
Sam, did you have a comment?
No, I mean, I think, well, I have a lot to say about cursive should be taught in schools because I think the quality of penmanship just across the board in this country is getting terrible. That's from working Vital Records, though. But yeah, I think signature matching is one of those things that's become sort of a hot topic lately, too, on the voting side. And it is important to remember, though, I think that's why one of the reasons photo ID came into play was that it was another means of verification. So signatures are going to vary, widely. Somebody signs a form 5 years ago and their signature might not look the same for various reasons. So, yeah, it's always going to be a problem, but I think that's why we have different means of verification too. So photo ID mitigates a lot of that on the voting side. And then, of course, like she was saying, for the clerks and the inspectors who sign the poll books, we can have other ways of tracking them down. So everything we do has multiple layers of verification. So I think that's probably the best way to go for most election things is just additional redundancy takes care of a lot of those concerns.
Thank you. A couple of questions about the role of the clerk and training. So what kind of training does the county clerk have for working with canvassers?
Well, the state will provide guidance with questions as they're available. There is, every few years, there's train the trainers that the State Bureau of Elections will put on for county clerks. And then, of course, a lot of the clerks are really good at working together collaboratively. So there's a lot of institutional knowledge, and an association, Michigan Association of County Clerks, provides resources for one another. This is what worked for us. This is what didn't. Here's some way we approach and roll these things out. So there's a pretty wide professional network that actually makes a lot of those things work really well. So it's just a combination of those things. The State Bureau of Elections is very busy, and they're often bogged down with legal challenges and things, so that their ability to provide training is usually 12 to 18 months before an election. As it gets closer, they just don't have the resources and personnel to provide any additional training. So the clerks just rely on each other and good documentation that exists and past practice.
I might also add, Steve met this year with some of the precinct clerks and Bonnie, the county clerk, and they met and presented some of the things, some of their questions and some of their problems that they were having, and then the next clerk over was saying, oh, well, this is how it's solved, and so they were having meetings this year to prepare for this, and so they got some of their questions answered that way too.
Yeah, I guess along those lines too, there's a good feedback loop too. So in a canvas, like she was talking about those signatures, having a hard time locating who signed what, and those typed up name cards that the inspectors and the township clerks were putting in, that came from a previous canvas when we had a real hard time matching up signatures. So it was, a feedback that was able to be provided from, and that's one of the roles we play, is to try to facilitate some of that feedback, because it's not, always fair to ask them to donate extra time to meet with, township clerks and precinct inspectors. So we always try to say, okay, this was the last canvas. They had problems, with these forms or with these signatures. We need to do, X, Y, and Z to sort of remediate that for next time.
Now, we're focused pretty much on the 2022 election that we just had, but am I right that the same canvassers are supposed to be available for up to four elections a year that Michigan allows? Is that right? The same canvassers would be doing the same things if we had, is it April, May, August, and November?
We are elected for 2 years. And it doesn't matter, whatever elections are in those 2 years, we cover. Then at the end of the 2 years, like I said, we would have to go back, either renew ours if we wanted to stay on, or they would get someone else, turn it into the commissioners, they had to approve it. But we cover whatever elections are in those 2 years that we're on the board.
That's whether or not there's any partisan candidates on the ballot. In other words, if it's just a library bond proposal, it would be the same canvassers.
They're back each time. And those are the hardest elections, I think, because everybody's let their guard down. Everybody's not in election mode. So it's always amazing, the canvassers arrange their whole year and their whole schedules around it when they're taking vacations just to come here and sit there and read a report for, we had a special election, just Fife Lake passing some kind of I don't know, was it an ambulance millage or something, and they all came in and just like they would after 2020, just reporting for duty.
Well, and also, the other thing that makes it a little more complicated is school board and school elections, because there's so many different precincts involved in each school. And so each precinct that's involved in that school's voting has to be kept in, and then you have to add it all up at the end for totals from all the different precincts.
Yeah, some of them are different counties too, right? So
Right.
we got to wait for the other counties to get their results over before, depending on who the filing official is, that can get really kind of fun.
We might have time for more questions, so if you need another card, raise your hand, and we can continue taking them. Sandy, you mentioned in your remarks that downstate might have different and more issues. Would you talk about what these other issues might be and how they are resolved?
Actually, I can't talk about those. I just know that they report they always have problems down there. It always takes them longer to get theirs counted. They always, of course, there's a lot more in that area. And so I really don't know what their problems are, and I don't know how they solve those problems.
Well, no, I'd be happy to jump in a little bit on that, because I had previously worked in elections in a sort of a large urban area in North Carolina, and what you can see sometimes, especially in a really densely populated area where there's a large transient population, students or low-income folks or people who move frequently, is a lot of people updating their registration on election day, or registering at the clerk's office on election day, then that adds an extra layer of paperwork too, right? So there's an address change form, and then they have to verify, they need to provide evidence of that address. So there's a few pieces of paper to look at when those same day registrations occur. Since 2018, when that was passed, we saw that initially in 2020 for the federal election, and then here in 2022. So you get a place like Detroit where there's a lot of folks moving in and out of different addresses from when they registered previously. It might take them a little bit longer at the polls. They might have to go to the clerk's office and update their address before they vote. That can add extra paperwork. And we're going to see, with the passage of Proposal 2, one of the provisions of that was postmarked ballots. So ballots that are postmarked by election day can be counted. Well, those are going to be brought up to the clerk's office here, in a pretty sizable stack, I would imagine, of, ones that need to be added on to the total. You go to a large urban area where there's, or a place where there's a large young population, college towns, places like that, you might get, big boxes of ballots that are arriving postmarked. So these will be things we look at in the future too. With local control becomes, different populations have different issues when it comes to administering an election. None of them necessarily, not making any value statements, but just depending on what kind of population you have. If you have more retirees, more students, more low-income folks, et cetera, you're just going to have a different series of processes and procedures that are more prevalent there.
This is for either of you. Does the Canvass Board have anything to do with provisional votes?
Yes.
what?
But we don't have a lot of provisional votes currently because they allow same-day registration at the clerk's office. So I don't believe we had any provisional ballots. I could be wrong, Sandy, but did we have any in 2022? We might have had one in
Had in
2020.
2020, but we haven't in 2022.
So that's, provisional ballots, for those who don't know, it's the Help America Vote Act, I think, passed in 2000. It's a fail-safe. Nobody should leave a precinct without having an opportunity to vote if that's what they choose to do. So they have an option to cast what they call a provisional ballot, which is a ballot that doesn't get put into the tabulator. It gets put into an envelope. And then it's up to the canvassers to say why this wasn't counted, should it be counted, should this vote be added to the total. That could be somebody who thinks they were registered, but the precinct inspector just can't find them. Could have been human error, they didn't find them in the e-poll book, so the person wanted to vote anyway, they vote an envelope or provisional ballot. We find them in the poll book afterwards and realize that should have counted, and then they'll take that and put it on. We don't have that very much. The precinct inspectors are pretty good. The Michigan poll book software is pretty good. And because you can go and same-day register, we don't have, if somebody shows up and they're not registered to vote, they get referred to the clerk's office. They go to their township or city clerk and they register to vote. And then they don't need to do a provisional ballot. We'll probably see, and with the passage of Proposal 2, more provisional ballots. Those will be things that we have to deal with a little bit more that we hadn't in the past, because that's just part of the nature of this new proposal, but that'll be fun for next time.
And we had law changes that went into effect this year for the first time, and you mentioned some of that. Are there other new things that you were dealing with this year for the first time based on changes in Michigan law?
I don't think at the canvas level. One of the things that was interesting about this election was pre-processing of absentee ballots was allowed. One jurisdiction, the city of Traverse City, decided that they would start pre-processing absentee ballots, which is I think the best way to explain it would be that they are able to prepare the ballots for tabulation, so to remove them from the envelope to make sure that all the signatures match and everything's properly counted, and get it ready to run through the tabulation machine on Election Day. Previously, they couldn't do that until the absentee county board convened on Election Day. Now they can do it a little bit ahead of time. So that was really the only major change from 2020 to 2022. 2024 will probably be a lot more interesting, because I think more jurisdictions are going to pre-process absentee ballots. And then we have to determine how this 9 days of early voting will work, if that'll be some sort of extension of the absentee process or not. So we could probably see some additional and extra things then, but that's mysterious to us right now. We don't know how the state's going to handle that. We know what the law said, we know what the proposal said, but until we have some administrative guidance on what that will actually look like for voters and for elections administrators, we don't know how that'll look for the canvassers. So.
And for pre-processing, who actually does the physical work for pre-processing? Is that the clerks?
It's the city or township clerks and their staff.
Okay. Are there any
And there will-
canvassers involved
It's not canvassers, but there will be precinct inspectors from both parties on hand.
from both parties? Thank you.
Usually the canvassers are not supposed to be involved in any other process. So they're not supposed to work the polls on Election Day. They're not supposed to be on the ballot for any reason or have family members on the ballot, or they'll have to recuse themselves. We kind of want them in a pure oversight, godly type role. I don't know. Is that,
Well,
we make them coffee. We try to make them happy.
but at the precinct level, you have representatives from 2 political parties.
Yep, that's a requirement. Anytime a ballot's open, there should be at least two people there.
Thank you. Sandy, have you experienced, well, Sam as well, have you experienced any threats or intimidation because of your work as a canvasser?
I have not. Everybody that like I said, very few people even ask me about it. I don't even know if they know what the Board of Canvassers does. So, no, I have never had a threat.
And I hope you haven't either, Sam.
No, nothing. I've had a lot of weird questions that I've never experienced in my life, but I think I don't know, I might be too big to threaten by, I'm not sure. People are, I would say, more curious about a lot of processes than they have been previously. And there's some people that are very passionate, but I think by and large in our community especially, people are courteous and they don't, it never reaches that level here that I've experienced.
Okay. This is from the audience, so it starts out, I have not, and that's not me, that's the audience. I have not heard the word certify. Is certification the task of the Board of Canvassers? Please broaden the discussion to other states and how these tasks are handled. I've been following the certification situation in Cochise County, Arizona.
Yeah, so every state has some kind of certification process. The canvassers certify the results here. Those are communicated to the State Board of Canvassers in Lansing, and they're just validating the results for the most part. They're not examining materials like our canvassers do here. It is, some states, the lieutenant governor is the chief executive or the chief elections officer. Some states, they have an appointed chief elections officer. Many times it's an elected official. Sometimes it's an elected board. It really varies on, where you go, I think. But by and large, there's always a certification process. Somebody is making a review at the local level, and then it has to be certified at the state level. The state certification process has gotten somewhat political here, but never to the extent of what it's doing in Arizona. So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in the Arizona system, it's up to the county Board of Commissioners to be the ones who approve a final canvass of the election and provide that certification. So, we don't have that here. Where I worked in North Carolina, we had the governor would appoint, would provide names to have depending on who the governor's party was, they would have control of what they called just the Board of Elections. They were political appointees who oversaw the process, but didn't actually do much of the actual work. They just looked over the results and certified the election. Some places it's elected officials that do that. So in Arizona, you have a situation where you have an elected partisan Board of Commissioners that have to look at that certification, look at the work that was done, and say yes or no by a vote. So you have a more political process when you have that happening. We have one level removed from that, right? We have appointed by political parties, people who actually do that. Once they sign off on it, we send that to the state and their work is done. So there is no political oversight necessarily for our Board of Canvassers. It's just once they've done their work, once they've signed it, once we transmit those results to the state, we have a permanent record of every county canvass dating all the way back, and that's our certification. That's our process. Every state does it differently, and depending on the level of political oversight, you can see situations like what we see arising in Arizona. I don't want to editorialize too much, but I think Michigan really does it the right way. You want it to be a public process. You want a level of accountability. You don't want to try to make it nonpartisan because that's impossible. So you put your partisanship out front and have your two parties working together, but keeping elected officials out of the final voting of the certification is probably a wise idea because they're not as informed on the actual work that's going on in the canvass. I would dare to say that the folks who are looking at this election in Cochise County are not basing their objections on what the canvassers would actually be looking at, which would be poll books and ballot tape and things that are important to look at, the ministerial things that you need to look at to certify an election. I think their considerations are largely political. Whether that's good or bad, I guess, depends on your politics, but it certainly is an extra wrinkle that we don't have to worry about with our folks. They're very professional and very above the political considerations of the moment for the most part, I would say.
And two, like I said before, the people who are in the poll at the time sign when they run the tape at the end of the day, they sign that. So it is certified that that's what they did. Our Board of Canvassers then looks at all that, makes sure that it agrees that it's what we consider to be correct, and then we certify that this was what we felt was good. And then once we are done with it, then it goes to the county clerk, and she in turn sends it to the state board of canvassers.
And as I tried to prepare for this program, I wondered, why do we say canvas or canvasser when we have different ideas about what that word means, like canvas you paint on, or
Sure.
canvas before an election where you canvas your neighborhood. And so, of course, I looked it up. And the derivation goes back to Old French, to Latin, and then back to Greek. And this meaning of canvas means to look deeply into, to evaluate in depth. And somehow it is also related to the canvas that you paint on and to the word cannabis. Serious? According to the internet. And it has to do with the fact that hemp is involved in the canvas that you paint on, or it used to be in the old days. And so that's all I know.
That's probably the reason you guys are laughing up there so much. Yeah.
I won't ask if there was hemp involved in that. Now, is the 2024 presidential election, or are presidential elections in any way different in terms of responsibilities? There might be more voters, but different from what you did this year for the midterms.
Like you said, there will be much more voters, I think, so it will take us longer to do it, but it's pretty much done the same thing.
No, I think that's what's so wild about elections administration is that if more people are paying attention to it, you don't have as many. It's the same amount of work logistically for if you're putting on an election, if 20 people vote, or if the whole county shows up. You still have to open everything, you still have to hire, you still have to train. And the canvassers, it's the same way. They still have to do their due diligence. They just have a higher volume and probably more interested people. We have to put it in a bigger room, and sometimes we have 2 observers instead of 1. It's not. But the actual work itself doesn't change hardly at all.
How is it handled if one or more of the canvassers are believers of conspiracies or are outwardly political? And it sounds like this isn't an issue here, but is there training involved in dealing with this?
No. We are just told that there's no political talk, or, if you feel you're conspiracy. First of all, I think if there's that type of a person, I don't think you would be recommended by your county chair. Your county chair is choosing 3 responsible people that they know will do a good job. And so when they turn their names into the county commissioners, then the county commissioners are looking at those 3 people and say, I don't see a problem with this person or this person. So I don't think we would get those kinds of people, first of all. But secondly, if they did show up, we would just say, we don't, we can't put up with that. You'll either have to get off the board, or you will be quiet and not bring these things up or cause a problem. So,
Well, I think it's a nightmare job for an election conspiracy person, because you just say, okay, here's everything, you find it. If you think it's there, here we are, show me where it is, and I think that would be not something that most folks would want to do. This is a working position. This isn't a position taking. This is like we got a lot of work to do, so everybody needs to. There's not time for that, really. But if it were, I think, again, I don't want to keep talking about Proposal 2 as a game changer, but one of the things in Proposal 2 was reiterating that the Board of Canvassers is ministerial, and they don't have authority, really, to not certify an election unless they can find some grounds to do it. So if somebody did have some outrageous positions or something, beyond the bounds of what they were authorized to be looking at and looking into, they wouldn't be authorized to act on that. That's one of the things Proposal 2 enshrined into law. So,
Yes.
concern. Sorry.
A yes or no question. Do canvassers get paid?
we do.
And if so, by whom?
Paid by the county, and we turn in our days or hours at the end when we're done, and we get one check when it's all finished. Bonnie claims that we're underpaid, and she would like for them to come up with a more payment, but at this point, I would say I'm not doing this to get rich.
Right. And where does the canvas take place?
Well, that's an interesting question, because the county building, we're about 3 different rooms this year because of remodeling at the county building. It's a public meeting, so it will be in the governmental center for the most part, but we have to sometimes find a room depending. 2020, obviously, we had a social distancing requirement, and trying to estimate how many people might show up to observe, we had to have a large room. So it'll sometimes determine on what kind of a meeting room we can find that's secure, that we can have for an indefinite period of time. So, county facilities is always very appreciative of election time when they have to do that for us. So, somewhere in the county building.
Thank you. Now, if there's a recount, either an automatic one or by petition, what role does the Board of Canvassers play?
I believe, and I don't know this for certain, Sam might know, I think they have a new team.
Yeah, so the canvassers are already certified, so the recount, depending on what, the actual conduct of the recount, they won't be involved in. That'll be a public meeting. It'll be noticed, posted, and then the clerk will be there, and then bipartisan recount teams will be there to handle the ballots. And then there'll be a different level of oversight there, always bipartisan, but we wouldn't convene the Board of Canvassers for that particular act.
Okay, so it's really the 4 elections, or potentially 4 elections a year, that you're responsible for.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Sandy, but don't you guys have to certify do you ever meet just to certify the containers too, right? Once every 4 years?
Right. Once every 4 years, we certify the containers that they put the ballots in. And this year, although we thought we were supposed to certify the drop boxes, and we did look at a couple of them, but then I guess the state did not decide that was necessary, so we didn't finish certifying the drop boxes. But we did certify a couple of them, and then nothing more was said. But yes, every 4 years, we certify the containers that they put them in. Some of them are tubs, some of them are Ziploc bag, or not Ziploc bags, but bags that are zipped closed and then locked. And we have to do that. We do have to certify those.
Always ballot storage containers. So I think it's really interesting, and maybe this is just a nerdy statement, maybe interesting is not the right word, but I always find it very interesting the way every ballot is treated as sacred in an election process. So every ballot that's printed is accounted for from the moment it walks through the door, from the printers until after the canvass, and then it gets locked up in these secure bags that have been inspected by the canvassers. So a spoiled ballot is still treated as a ballot, so that every time when we look at an election afterwards, we get ordered 2,500 ballots for a jurisdiction, 1,248 were voted, we're going to know where the other 1,252 or whatever ballots are. So, how many were spoiled? How many are unvoted? Where are those located? And they're signed off by these bipartisan teams, so that every ballot that ever walks through that door is properly accounted for. So we have a paper trail of not just every vote cast, but every ballot that's ever been looked at and under the possession of any jurisdiction. So it's actually kind of cool, I think, the way these things, chain of custody is handled and the security that goes into those ballots. And that container process sounds kind of silly in a way, like you have to have 4 people look at a bag and make sure that there's no false bottom in it or something, right, like a magician's trick. But it's actually kind of part of this process, the very beginning process, like, okay, you're going to store ballots in this container. It's going to get signed off by 4 people, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. You can use this bag now. You know, if you put it in something you're not supposed to put it in and we have a recount and that's not a certified container, it's not recountable. So it's, you know, it's a, seems like a trivial thing, but it's part of a greater, you know, sense of security, right? If you treat everything as important, if you treat everything as a critical in the lifespan of, you know, a ballot, it builds that security into the process, that integrity into the process.
I think that's a great note to end on, thinking of the sanctity of our ballots. And I think we've answered everybody's questions. We had a number that you answered already in your presentations, and we certainly appreciate that. So Sandy Call and Sam Gedman, thank you so much for being here today. Margaret Mansour has a few words for our closing.
I'd just like to add my thanks to both of you for such a wonderful presentation. I learned a lot, and it was very enjoyable to listen to you because there were so many different variables that get involved in just the act of voting. So the only thing that I have left to say besides thanks for coming is there's a program on Tuesday, January 17th, 2023, that's next year, from noon to 1:30, which is virtual only. So it's going to be on Zoom, the Facebook, channel 189 with Spectrum TV in Northwest Lower Michigan. And it includes a program on the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA. And there will be information about funds for each county that the League of Women Voters serves. So that includes Antrim, Benzie, Crawford, Grand Traverse, and Kalkaska counties. And a representative from each of these counties will discuss how their county is using the funds. So again, that's on January 17th, 2023, from noon to 1:30. Thank you all for coming, and thanks again to our speakers. It was a great program.